If you've ever stared at two-site templates and wondered why your SharePoint rollout turned into Groundhog Day, you're in the right place. Stop guessing which tool will save you hours and which will cause even more headaches. Let's break down the real-life wins and gotchas between PnP PowerShell and the PnP framework for site provisioning so you can finally stop wrestling with templates that just won't stick. PnP PowerShell, the sharpshooter or the shortcut? If you've ever fired off a PnP PowerShell script to tweak a SharePoint site late on a Friday and felt like a wizard until the next Monday, you're in familiar territory. Most admins dip their toes into SharePoint automation with PowerShell for one simple reason. It feels fast, tangible, and you think predictable. The usual connect, apply changes, disconnect approach puts you firmly in the driver's seat. You can see each command run, you get instant feedback, and in a single small environment or for a couple of repeat tasks, it almost feels like cheating in a good way. Dragging and dropping through site settings is fine for one-off tasks, but with PowerShell, you script the process once and replay it whenever you want. That's how a lot of us fall in love with the control. But then reality checks roll in. Let's say you finally get the script to add the right site columns, create a custom list, and set permissions. Perfect, right? That is until the site owner asks you to rerun it for a slightly different site. Suddenly, a tweak that swapped out one field ends up wiping another. Or worse, the script crashes halfway, and now you're stuck with a half-baked site. I still remember patching up a knowledge-based site for a support team thinking I'd solved everything with a dozen lines of updating columns. Worked great on dev, but the moment I ran it on test, a single bad variable wiped half the list titles. That's the moment you realize how little safety net these scripts give you. PowerShell's magic lies in how quickly you can bang out changes for a single site or maybe two or three, especially when the stakes are low and you need quick wins. You're hunting down a bug, rolling out a quick list, or mass updating permissions ahead of a project launch. You don't need to learn XML. And you certainly don't need to document every object you touch. It's do this, then that. The classic imperative style. According to Microsoft's PowerShell usage surveys, a majority of admins stick with PowerShell for ad hoc tasks because it's the shortest path between the problem and the fix. You script what must happen, hit run, and watch SharePoint respond. In small environments or for those one-off requests from business users who just need one list or just want a few web parts shifted, PowerShell gives you that superpower to act directly without feeling like you're building a spaceship for a 5-minute trip. But here's where the road gets bumpy. That same sense of control comes back to bite as soon as you step outside those small jobs. The moment higher-ups ask for 10 identical sites with minor differences, your script starts morphing into a spider web of if-else blocks, hard-coded URLs, and copy-paste jobs. If you're thinking, can't I simply loop through a CSV and bang out a dozen sites? Sure, until you get 3 errors, 5 warnings, and realize what worked on one tenant completely falls apart on another because someone tweaked the base template last month. Now, instead of feeling in control, you're tracking down subtle bugs, permissions mismatches, and half-completed provisioning jobs. And it isn't just you. Industry research from Collab 365 reports that admins relying heavily on imperative scripts for even mid-sized rollouts see a drastic uptick in troubleshooting time. The scripts built for one scenario quietly hard-code assumptions from your dev environment, site URLs, content types, or feature activations that might not exist elsewhere. Suddenly, your carefully crafted script becomes a set of duct tape fixes. The first leak is easy to patch, but if you keep sticking on more tape, soon you can't even see the original pipe. Worse, those quick scripts are notoriously hard to document. It's far too easy to forget which columns you touched, what permission inheritance you broke, or which workaround you stuffed in the just for now section. If you've ever spent hours reverse engineering someone else's or your own PowerShell to figure out why a site doesn't quite match another or why a feature is missing in half of your team sites, you know the feeling. The real trouble comes when your ad hoc solution starts spreading. Suddenly, 20 sites depend on a script that should have stayed a one-off, and every small tweak multiplies the risk that something breaks. The same script that made you feel like a SharePoint rockstar last month can quickly become the reason you're dreading the next rollout. Still, it's not all horror stories. PowerShell absolutely belongs in your toolkit for targeted, time-limited changes. Need to update a specific site collection? One domain tweak. Maybe patch a broken list that isn't worth retemplating. This is where the shelf life of PowerShell shines. You need focus, speed, and surgical impact, not a long-term solution. But if your ambition creeps past a couple sites or your organization expects repeatable patterns, that's when the simplicity turns into a tangle. So what do you do when Band-Aid fixes just aren't enough? If your SharePoint landscape is getting more complex and your business teams want every new department site to look and behave the same, you need something a bit more robust than just scripting your way through each rollout. That's where the world of automation takes a sharp turn, from scripting to declarative templates, from quick patches to structured provisioning. PnP framework, site provisioning, repeatable magic, or overkill. If you've ever had that moment of envy, looking at a perfectly configured SharePoint site and thinking, why can't I just copy that across my environment? You're not alone. That urge to clone, to stamp out consistency without going insane, is exactly where the PnP framework lures you in. Instead of writing out every command like PowerShell, the framework flips the rules. You describe what you want, and it builds the site for you. That's what we mean by a declarative approach. No more step-by-step, do this, then this. You simply define the end state. The framework reads your template like a blueprint and gets to work, filling in all the structural details along the way. Now, on paper, that sounds like utopia. It's the SharePoint version of set it and forget it. You write out the template once, ideally in a nice XML or JSON format that spells out the lists, libraries, content types, branding, all the way down to little things like views and site columns. The promise is huge. Scale out new team sites for every department, onboard project sites with the same navigation and permissions, and never worry about missing a column or applying styles by hand again. You get that peace of mind, at least until it's time to make your first change. Because here's the tension. PnP framework is brutally impartial. It will do exactly what your template asks, but not one pixel more. And that means one typo in the schema or one missed element can make debugging a painful, sometimes thankless process. XML as a format loves to surface the tiniest flaw at the worst possible moment. Suddenly, you switch from feeling like an automation hero to arguing with an error message that talks about unexpected token at line 56. And good luck if you try to wedge a last-minute change into an already sprawling template. That'll send you spelunking through layers of nested properties. But that upfront hassle is there for a reason. When you move away from scripting tiny changes and start thinking about entire site collections, you enter a different league. The PnP framework's provisioning engine isn't just a cute tool for tinkerers. It's what lets large organizations set real standards. For companies rolling out a dozen or more identical communication sites, or who want compliance baked in from day one, the framework is a kind of safety harness. You build your template once, run it through the engine, and get the same outcome every time, regardless of who's at the keyboard. Take, for example, financial services companies. Many of them use templates to enforce strict permission structures, site branding, and even pre-configured retention labels. This isn't just about laziness, it's about governance and auditability. Healthcare orgs that move to the framework often report that after a bumpy start, moving away from ad hoc scripts reduced their number of site configuration errors by over 40%. They finally had control over sprawl, and updates became less of a wild goose chase. Now, the catch, and there's always a catch, with declarative provisioning is that you pay your dues up front. Learning the provisioning schema takes time. The documentation is a maze, and small changes can have wide ripple effects. Initial site templates aren't built in an afternoon. But once you break through that learning curve, everything after gets easier. Need to deploy a new policy to every future project site, change one line in the template, and it's done. Need to update branding across hundreds of existing sites. Rerun the same template and let the engine do the heavy lifting. Think of it like building with an official Lego set instead of freestyling with loose bricks from a thrift store. The instructions are strict, but if you follow them, you get what's on the box every single time. There's less room for artists' interpretation, which is the whole point. In practice, this means you trade early complexity and some occasional frustration for consistency, predictability, and long-term savings in effort, especially when you need to provision not just 5 or 6 sites, but 50 or 500. Still, none of this works if your templates turn into giant balls of mud. The line between structure and chaos is pretty thin. It's tempting to cram everything into one massive file, but seasoned admins quickly learn the value of keeping templates modular and well-structured. If you build with that in mind, small focused templates that can be mixed and matched, you turn what used to be provisioning roulette into something you trust. Declarative templates, when built right, give you more than just speed. They let you enforce standards, pass audits, and sleep at night knowing your sites match, right down to the details. Companies that took the time to invest in the PnP framework often find they save countless troubleshooting hours later on. If your environment is getting more complex, the payoff gets bigger every time you avoid a manual fix. Of course, all this order comes with its own headaches. The moment your template library starts growing, the next big question isn't just how do I build these, but how do I keep them from spiraling out of control? Because provisioning, even with the best engine, is only as good as your plan for change. And nothing exposes weaknesses in your process faster than trying to update live templates with a dozen teams waiting for their next site. Template taming, best practices, versioning nightmares, and real-world wins. If you've ever been the person who pushed a template update, maybe just a tweak to a list or a new web part, only to watch half your SharePoint sites break overnight, you know the pain. It's not just you. Every admin who's tried to keep site templates up to date for multiple teams hits this wall sooner or later. The reality is, as soon as more than one group relies on your templates, you're not just provisioning sites, you're managing a living, breathing piece of business infrastructure. And with that comes the challenge of making sure your changes don't break things for everyone while still keeping up with new requirements and requests from across the organization. What makes PnP provisioning so tempting is also what makes it risky at scale. The templates can exist as a single source of truth. One change lands everywhere. The problem is those everywhere changes can ripple out with results that are more unpredictable than you'd like. Teams spin up their own versions, business units tweak for their own needs, and suddenly that master template starts drifting in a dozen directions. This is where versioning flips from an afterthought to a must-have discipline. Ignore template evolution, and suddenly you're stuck managing a Frankenstein's monster of mismatched sites. The double-edged sword here is obvious. Leave a template untouched for too long, and it gets stale, failing to reflect the latest business needs or compliance rules. On the other hand, roll out a new version without thinking through the impact, and you might trigger a cascade of failures. It's not just about breaking one thing. Sometimes a new field or web part collides with an old customization, and suddenly connections break, permissions get reset, or data fields disappear. A team that relied on a legacy field can wake up to find it missing and start shouting, all because of a silent update somewhere upstream in the process. So what actually works in practice? Let's talk best practices before things spiral. Modularity should be your first instinct. Instead of creating one mega template to rule them all, split them into reusable chunks. Lists, document libraries, branding, navigation, treat these as separate building blocks you can assemble as needed. If one feature needs an update, you're only touching one module, not the whole house of cards. That not only helps with stability, but also makes troubleshooting far less painful. Parameterization is another lifesaver. Hard-coding values like URLs, department names, or user accounts is inviting trouble. When you build templates that accept parameters, think department name or region code, suddenly the same template can serve dozens of business units without risky copy-paste jobs. Documentation isn't just a nice-to-have either. It's your safety net for future you and every teammate who inherits this pile. A running comment section inside your templates or a simple README explaining what each block does goes further than you'd expect. Too many disasters start because someone tweaks a line they didn't understand or reuses a template block without knowing its dependencies. Now, template versioning is where things make or break. Tracking versions with meaningful numbers, semantic versioning, for example, lets you pinpoint when a problem started. Pair that with version-controlled storage, like Git, and you've got a full history. If users start reporting issues, you know exactly which change to roll back. The importance of change logs can't be overstated. Record not just what changed, but why. Next time someone asks why a field suddenly vanished or why their site looks different, you can show them a simple history instead of hunting through old backups. There's a reason teams who log every update report less finger pointing when something goes wrong. I've seen situations where a single missed dependency brought multiple departments to a halt. In one mid-sized healthcare company, an admin updated the main provisioning template to reflect new regulatory requirements. Totally reasonable. But they overlooked a custom workflow 4 teams relied on. Within hours, those teams found forms missing and automated emails not firing. No one had flagged the dependency, and a rollback took most of the day. When the team adopted modular templates and a strict version history, those blind spots vanished. Every update required review of affected modules, and rolling back a bad change never meant unwinding the entire provisioning process. Mistakes still happened, but they could fix them in hours, not days. Research from ShareGate and Microsoft's own adoption programs bears this out. The most common causes of template headaches: hard-coded values that refuse to scale, no documented process for rollbacks, and ignoring dependencies between modules. Site sprawl creeps in when old versions of templates linger, and firefighting becomes the new normal. If you never want to rehearse the line, "We didn't realize updating navigation would delete everyone's links," these habits are your safeguard. The reward is more than just self-preservation. Well-built templates cut down on support tickets. They let you update hundreds of sites safely, building trust in your automation instead of eroding it. That's when your SharePoint environment starts to feel predictable, not just for admins, but for business users too. Templates should change with your needs, but never at the cost of stability. Still, even perfectly managed templates can produce surprises. Automation doesn't mean error-free, it just changes what can go wrong. So when your next big template update fails in production but worked everywhere else, what then? Troubleshooting and choosing your path, avoiding pitfalls, and planning your migration. If you've ever had a template spin up a flawless SharePoint site in dev and then totally fail in production, you know what true frustration looks like. It's easy to feel like you've covered every base when testing in your sandbox, only to discover that your "works on my machine" fix quickly turns into "why is nothing working now" in the real world. The gap between development and production isn't just a matter of luck. Most of the time, it comes down to hidden roadblocks. Think API throttling, subtle permission gaps, or those odd features that are available in one environment but not the other. Sometimes a template falls flat because a site script references a feature still in preview. Or worse, you hit a content type limit that isn't documented anywhere obvious. SharePoint has a knack for keeping those little differences under wraps until you're running against live data. When things break, the guessing game starts. Was the problem baked into the template itself? Did something change in the environment? Maybe a missing app, a recent policy tweak, or a background process that you've never had to care about until now? Or is it the tool that's letting you down? Maybe an out-of-date PnP framework library or a PowerShell module version with a new quirk that nobody blogged about yet. If you're troubleshooting a provisioning failure, you've probably spent time wondering which moving part is actually guilty. The hunt can take hours, jumping between logs, checking settings, and rereading documentation that never quite lines up with your scenario. So what's the fix? First, crank up your logging. It sounds boring, but detailed logs turn needle in a haystack problems into something you can attack directly. Set your scripts or PnP framework runs to capture verbose output. That way you'll get more than a generic error. You'll see exactly what step bailed out, what object failed to create, and sometimes even why. Next, resist the urge to run the whole template in one hit. Apply your provisioning steps incrementally. Run one module at a time in your test tenant and check the results before stacking the next. If all you see is a red X and a cryptic SharePoint message, drill down further. Sometimes the error is 2 steps removed from the failed object. Permissions blocked a web, which blocked a sublist, which made everything downstream look broken. Test tenants aren't just a nice to have, they're essential. Running your templates on a near production environment with proper data, permissions, and external services will tell you most of what you need to know before a real user ever clicks a link. You'll start to spot where version mismatches, API changes, or feature disparity lurk. Don't skip this step thinking you're saving time. You're only stacking up surprises for later. When you hit the inevitable error message that makes no sense, don't just stare at the screen. Copy that ugly error and drop it into the Microsoft documentation search or hit up the PnP community forums. Chances are someone else has run into it before. SharePoint's quirks are legion, but there's power in numbers. A quick search can reveal workarounds, support tickets, or hotfixes, sometimes within hours of a new update being released. If you find yourself spending more time decoding cryptic error dumps than writing templates, remember, the support ecosystem exists for a reason. Here's a twist. Sometimes the brute force PowerShell approach can help when all else fails. While declarative templates are wonderful for structure and scale, using a direct PowerShell script on a test site lets you isolate whether the problem is in the framework or SharePoint itself. A short script doing the same basic operation, adding a content type, breaking inheritance, creating a list, can confirm if the underlying service is misbehaving or if it's the template's fault. Think of it as running ping tests before blaming your router. Sometimes going back to basics tells you exactly where things went off the rails. Now, let's talk migration. Moving from a world of classic PowerShell scripts to the more robust, repeatable PnP framework templates doesn't happen overnight. You want to avoid downtime and user disruption. Start by mapping out every script you use. Figure out which are ripe for conversion. Begin with low-risk provisioning jobs, like new teams or simple libraries, and convert these into declarative templates. Once you trust the structure, work your way up to more critical workflows. Use parallel runs for a while. Let both approaches exist together so you have a rollback plan in case something blows up. Eventually, phase out the quick scripts when your framework approach proves it can deliver consistent results. But it's worth noting the superpowers of PowerShell don't just vanish. There will always be those moments where a script is the fastest answer, urgent fixes on legacy sites, features that templates don't support yet, or quick experiments. Sometimes the right answer isn't picking one tool forever, but knowing when to switch lanes. If your urgent fix has to go live now, PowerShell has your back. For everything repeatable and at scale, templates do the real lifting. The bottom line, there's no magic bullet tool, just the right approach for each situation. Stay curious, lean into troubleshooting, and don't assume complexity means a smarter answer. Matching your tool to the job and keeping escape routes handy is often what separates a smooth migration from a support nightmare. When you plan ahead, test with intention, and trust your documentation, you're less likely to find yourself stuck in the never-ending "why did it break this time" loop. Instead, you spend your time building, not firefighting, and soon enough, that becomes the new normal for your SharePoint environment. The reality is, having the right tool in your toolbox can cut your workload, but it's your strategy that keeps you from losing sleep during the next SharePoint rollout. If you haven't already, take a hard look at how you're provisioning sites. There's always that one step or habit, maybe template versioning or better logging, that could save you hours down the line. Nobody gets through a big migration without scars, so let's be honest about it. Share your biggest success or your worst never again moment in the comments.